Hello and welcome to another episode of the djproject Criterion Collection. And here we're going to talk about Spine 282, Andrzej Wajda's 3 war films. Andrzej Wajda is a Polish film director and very influential director, and very important director for Poland. He's part of, he studied at the Lodz Film School, which for a long while was one of the few very liberal, least communist places you could go, and this proved to be very helpful for Polish cinema, and consequently for world cinema. He's part of an informal group of directors known as the Polish Film School, who were inspired by Italian neorealism and went against a lot of Soviet-style filmmaking, as well as just the Soviet Union. By the way, I have kind of a soft spot for Poland because they're one of the few nations on Earth that actually give a damn about about freedom, and they don't tolerate people coming in and occupying territory, and yeah, I know they've been kicked around, but they also, they don't want to put up with all of it. So I have kind of a soft spot for Poland. Anyways, but I digress. But anyways, this is one of those cases where it wasn't intentional that there was a trilogy made, but there were 3 films that share a same theme that were in the beginning of his career and helped establish his reputation. So for here, they're all grouped together. This is director approved, so the idea of calling it a trilogy is not entirely verboten, even though it wasn't intentionally constructed to be so. So the 3 films are, first one was released in 1955, A Generation. This is his first feature film, and it's the story of a fairly young man who, and this is during the Nazi occupation of Poland, and a young man is really kind of, well, starters, he's a teenager, and it's that whole coming of age and wanting to be one's own man, but also he's tired of the occupation, and he ends up working at a factory where he's taken in, and basically the whole film is sort of a school of hard knocks, or him going through the school of hard knocks. He works at a factory. He learns who to like and who not to like. The overseer gives him a very elementary lesson in basic Marxism, which you would think, okay, that's a little bit ham-fisted, but thinking about it more, it's probably for one or two things. One, to keep whatever censors happy that something has been addressed, and 2, the way that what ends up happening, he joins a resistance groups that is rooted in communism, and so it is one of those setups and slight payoffs, but without making too much of a big deal out of it. That's probably the most that sort of elementary Marxist lesson. That's probably the only time you get any kind of really overt political philosophy. A lot of it is rooted in the characters and the situations, and just him learning how to fight for a cause, how to demonstrate some tact dealing with unruly people, or dealing with instances of betrayal. It's pretty good and especially for a first film. It's it's one of those films where it's actually, and certainly it's one of those debuts where you look at it and you go, this is he's gonna go places, and Wajda ended up going to various places. So I thought I would like it less, but actually it holds up fairly well. Then the next film is, actually this is my favorite of the three, Kanal, and this came out in 1957. Kanal is set during the Warsaw Uprising of 1944, and this, I think, is one of the few films you can find where it's about a battle lost. Most war films depict victory or some kind of victory, and from there you get, you know, triumph over adversity. You get it's battle of wills, the strongest survive, all those various heroic virtues. But this is an example of a film where this is about a losing battle, and it I mean, what makes it interesting is not so much that they lost, is that you can still find those heroic virtues even in the situation where you lose. Because if you know anything about any war, if you look at it, while there often is an ultimate victory in the end, the road you get there is marked with a lot of ups and downs. Take the American Civil War. I mean, yeah, depending on what side you are on the conflict, you have the battles that you remember very fondly and the battles that you don't remember fondly, or you wish they wouldn't happen. And you know, and the same thing here. And it's very easy to take World War II, to look at World War II as there are some. Well, actually, World War II is kind of complicated because because you can depict other things with World War II that have nothing to do with actual battles, but you can still get some bleak ideas out of it. You can get some bleak themes and ideas from it. So anyways, so the point of all this is that it looks at a battle where it ultimately the Poles lose, but it's still very engaging. In fact, the very first thing you see is this long tracking shot. It actually starts, well, sorry, the credits are just a straightforward montage, but when you get into the action, it's a long tracking shot that starts long off in the distance, and then it sort of pans and moves down from left to right, and then follows along on this street. And the shot itself lasts for 6 minutes, and it's impressive, the choreography and seeing this action gradually unroll itself. And this is, again, this is during the Warsaw Uprising, and so you hear gunshots, you pass by ruins, there's a car or two that's inflamed, and soldiers are hunkering down and trying to move along into the next position. And it's this long take, lasts for 6 minutes, and you can't help but feel impressed by that move. And yeah, it is ultimately bleak, but at the same time, you really get this, and this is true with all the films on here, is you get a sense of what war really does to you. In fact, going a little bit back to A Generation, that's the other big takeaway from that film, is that war, it does, it leaves all kinds of wounds, and not just in the obvious of ways where you're shot or stabbed or maimed or whatnot. It definitely leaves an impression, and it's also what can survive. Some things are lost and some things are retained in that. But anyways, I'm going a little bit off track. But anyways, Kanal, like it's set in the Warsaw Uprising, and this battalion, which then gets gradually reduced over the course of these couple of days, they first get to this house. They were able to hold it off for a while, but the Germans are still relentless, and they have to. And they also hear through the grapevine that the city is that Warsaw is getting more and more lost. So the Germans are overwhelming them. There's very few places where they're still around, and so they need to consolidate whatever forces they have. And basically they even knew that the battle was lost. So now it becomes a matter of endurance and survival. And the bulk of the action, the bulk of the story, are in the midst of these sewers that are used as a way of escaping from one part of town and going into another. And it does take on a Dante's Inferno quality. In fact, it's actually Dante is quoted in it, so it makes it very, very obvious. And it's just having to survive and having to deal with it. And it's very claustrophobic, and it's impressive that it was filmed in such a way where you really feel you just feel the constrained feeling of the set, of the scene, of the setting. Sorry, is again, considering this was released in 1957, and it played at the Cannes Film Festival. I think it had to play out of competition because of the usual affair with politics and all. But it was quite impressive. And again, this is all from Poland, and this was his third feature-length film, and already he's already going places. And then finally, the last film is Ashes and Diamonds, 1958, and this is where the first two films are pretty much, there's a lot of elements of Italian neorealism and maybe some other like classic American cinema. You could probably cite Ford in there, and just pretty sort of straightforward shots, and any kind of symbolisms or themes are more rooted in the story and the characters. It's not really overt. This is a lot more expressive in terms of its cinematography and the way things are played out. It's very much informed by film noir. In fact, you see a lot of deep focus photography, and there's a lot of shots that are very reminiscent of Citizen Kane, and there's probably some Hitchcock in there as well, and just it goes into hyper expressive territory. The symbolisms are much more apparent on that one. Ashes and Diamonds covers the very last days of World War II in Europe. And so this is May 8th and May 9th. It takes place basically over about 24 to 36 hours or so, May 1945. And while Poland is celebrating the end of World War II, this is, of course, kind of bittersweet. And considering this was made a little over a decade after it, it's it's very easy to look back on this as kind of bittersweet. Yes, the Nazis are out of Poland. Yes, the Nazis are defeated. But you replace it with the Soviets. And it almost becomes a situation of meet the new boss, same as the old boss. The central character is a resistance fighter. And he's played by Zbigniew Tijbolski. And I apologize if I tried very hard to work on the pronunciation, but I probably still botched it, so my apologies. As soon as you look at him, he immediately strikes you as James Dean. In fact, he's often remembered as the Polish James Dean. He also died suddenly, and died at a fairly young age. He was almost 40. At any rate, but he has the... This is where it kind of works for the film, and it can also work against the film. Even though this is set in 1945, he looks nothing like somebody from 1940. The way he presents himself, the wearing sunglasses, including wearing sunglasses at night, and dressed in a open field jacket and you know, everything's loose. I mean, he looks straight out of the 50s. I mean, he's very much of his time. But it was a look that he felt very comfortable. He was very, very comfortable in presenting himself in that way. And Wajda was not the biggest fan of it in the beginning. He wanted it to be a little bit more historically accurate. But then he realized that if you try to put him in that kind of uniform with, you know, the knee-high boots and you know, more fitted uniform, it just wouldn't work on him. In fact, it would make him look it would be unintentionally humorous. And what was more important was more the emotions and the feelings. And so anyways, so this resistance fire, he has a mission to assassinate a party director, not a big honcho, but a fairly prominent party official, who himself is actually portrayed in a fairly sympathetic light. It's not, I mean, in spite of Wajda's own reservations, and he was more against jingoism, just aggressive foreign policy. He might have had some sympathies with some of the communist ideals, but he probably didn't buy into the whole package. But he's not portrayed as a major villain. In fact, he was part of his background is that he fought in the Spanish Civil War, and that was also to kind of help ease the censors a little bit, to ease their reservations that, you know, this is this is an okay guy. Of course, the funny thing is that when the film was released in Poland, pretty much everybody identified with the I want to say his character's name is Mikhail, but and I could be wrong on this, but anyways, they identified more with Mikhail, and yeah, just go for the contemporary stuff. But at any rate, and this is where I think this is why I'm certainly impressed with the craft and the work that put into it, and I admire a lot of the expressive shots. This is the film where to me it feels slightly uneven, or maybe even just uneven. There are good shots mixed in with not bad shots, just not particularly interesting. And there's some points where it feels like it drags a bit in terms of exposition, and maybe some of the stuff comes off as somewhat heavy-handed. Not too bad, but it can be a little bit obvious. But some of it is actually quite striking and memorable. Probably the most striking is near the end, where, and actually Tarkovsky made some comments about it and really liked the symbolism. And I'll just say that just look for the end, and you might appreciate the symbolism there. So yeah, it was really tough to kind of get into it again. And again, because I'm going through a whole lot of titles, you get to kind of a somewhat of a burnout period, and maybe this is what hopefully it will get better as I go along, and I give myself a little bit of a break. But having said all that, it is, you know, it is very impressive, and it was a film that was a little bit ahead of its time in the sense that you have, okay, after World War II, you have Italian neorealism that really kind of showed that there was more things that you can do with cinema. It doesn't have to be just the same old, that you can do more, and you can utilize more, and this sort of showed that the possibilities are a little bit more wider and not constrained. And then little by little, you have these sort of cinematic renaissances that happened all over the world. And in an interesting way, Poland kind of led the charge, and Wajda was really key in that. And if it wasn't for that, you wouldn't have the Nouvelle Vague. Of course, France was getting there due to a love of Italian neorealism and film noir, but it was just starting in the late 40s with Italian neorealism, and then onwards, there's this little by little there was going to be this explosion of cinematic possibilities, and so in that sense it is an important film to show that in that evolution and such. So but yeah, but yeah, like I said, the films themselves, they all deal with, obviously they deal with war, but they particularly look at kind of the human cost of it. You know, what is lost, and what can remain, what's important to retain, and it definitely set up his career from then on. His most recent film, I don't know if he did anything afterwards, but in 2007 he did Katang, which is or Katin, I think. I could be botching the pronunciation. I'm sorry, but this was based on the 1940 massacre that occurred in Poland, and actually his father was one of the unfortunate victims, and that got nominated for the Best Foreign Film Oscar for that year. So I would be interested in seeing that, to kind of see. And to be honest, I haven't seen a lot of Wajda's films apart from those three, so it'd be interesting to see that and then try to tie that in with the others. So, but definitely check them out, and you know, I definitely recommend Kanal. It is one of my favorites. But definitely see all of them. And you may have your ones that you like more than the others. So, but yeah, so Andrzej Wajda's 3 war films. And until next time, take care.